Welcome to the Circle Live, an EMC technology community that tackles the tough questions. I'm Mark Jones. Well, if there's one trend in enterprise computing that keeps dominating the headlines, it's cloud computing. Yes, it is a buzzword, and some of us might even have a bit of cloud fatigue, but the reality is cloud computing is fundamentally changing the way we work. So, joining me live on the Circle Live today is a diverse group of business and technology leaders who are passionate about the cloud.
The idea really here is to have a discussion, if you like, by the industry for the industry. What's the real issues? What are people battling with, right? As we go through and we do this journey, we're not quite sure exactly where the end point is, etc. And that's why we want to create this forum where everybody can share, learn, and have an experience.
I want to start with you, John Brennan. You're the head of IT at InvoCare. You're in the market for cloud computing, as it turns out. So where's it all headed from your perspective?
From my perspective, I'm looking at saving costs, not just my own internal costs and my outsourcing costs, but how do I get to the latest technology? I'm stuck with an old Office and an old Exchange version. The easiest way without risk is to move to the cloud. And I'm looking at a pilot next year with about 20 users initially to go onto the cloud, fully managed, and then see how that goes and see the acceptance. My main criteria for its success, I think security has to be a given. The real crux is performance and where the hosting is. From the service I'm looking at, it's in Singapore. Is that going to be fast enough?
John Duckett, General Manager of IT at Philips Fox. Thanks for joining us. You're actually an early adopter of the cloud, so what are your reactions to?
I'm a bit of a skeptic about the commercial value of cloud computing. I mean, the hybrid and the software as a service, etc. And our experiences, and maybe because we are fairly advanced technology-wise, is that if you look strictly at commercials, there's no real value to be outsourcing into hybrids and public clouds.
Just to pick up on some of the things John was saying then, so you're very much in the private camp, as it were.
Well, we're 100% virtualised in respect to servers. We do have some services outsourced. However, those services that we outsourced actually come at a premium to what we would do internally.
Robert Umfleby is a director at CSC. You've heard some of these early comments. What are your thoughts about this from the integration perspective?
What we find with a lot of our customers is that they've got a bit of everything, but they don't have an integrated strategy about what comes first. And I think the point that's just been made, it's really about the business outcome. IT's been doing many of these flavours of service for many years in different forms with less agility. And for us, it's about looking at the business, whether you're mining, oil and gas, a bank, but what's the business function you want to squeeze into the cloud? But what we're also seeing is a lot of blockage from our customers in the terminology that the IT industry has put in our way, and so quite often we get pushback through the terminology before we can even talk business with it.
Okay, well, Kevin McIsaac from IBRS, it would only seem appropriate that we should ask you about terminology. You probably, eat jargon for breakfast, I don't know.
I think it makes a lot more sense if you start breaking it down into things. Overall, the cloud is a journey. It's a journey to a better IT with some different capabilities, but there are many, many paths. Infrastructure as a service, software as a service, and we heard a bit about that from email. Where do I start? Where do I want to end? Do I want to go the full journey or part the way? So I don't like the term cloud. I think it's way too broad. Let's talk about virtualizing our existing resources.
Kevin Block is the CTO at Cisco. Thanks for joining us. What are your thoughts?
So cloud's this sort of IT industry word, but at the end of the day, it's a build by decision, and it is a journey. And the reason it's a journey is because many people can't buy it yet because either it's not cost effective or it's not reliable. But as soon as the industry, the service providers provide a lower cost and more reliable alternative, just like electricity, people will not be buying infrastructure for their IT. They'll be buying it as a service.
I'd actually like to go to you, Siobhan Ellis from HP. Now, you're actually in the undecided camp, if I could put it that. Is there too much buzz around the cloud?
It's really using technology to just relaunch services that are already there. So outsourcing services have been there for a long time, and it very much is argued that cloud services are basically just another form of outsourcing. It's just using different technology to deliver the same services more quickly.
But the reality of it is the cloud is actually making applications more available to users worldwide, just as the internet did many years ago. In the 80s, trying to get things linked together with Token Ring or Ethernet or something like that. Took a rocket scientist to get a TCP/IP stack going. Now what we've done is removed a lot of that complexity. We've now actually enabled businesses worldwide on a global basis to be able to get access to their applications. And I think that's actually what the benefit of the cloud is.
You now can float it anywhere you want. You can have it in-house, you could have it at somebody else's infrastructure, you could float it, you could, again, cloud being the buzzword, meaning that it could exist anywhere at any point of time.
Where the hybrid comes in for us, if you look at the cloud as being outsourced services looked after by someone else with skills and resources and technology you don't have, we already did that before the cloud came along.
Optus managed to bring a really profoundly changed prepaid mobile offering to market in what looks like between 60 and 90 days, from conception to execution to advertising. That's what business wants from this cloud stuff.
It seems to be that the higher the virtualization of a company, the easier it is to migrate to cloud.
I don't think it is. I think it's a technique that you can get to the cloud. It's perhaps for an internal cloud, it's infrastructure oriented, it's probably a key technique. But if you look at software as a service, take for example email, take Google Mail, which we use as an organisation. There's no virtualization anywhere to be seen in that. So I think it is a mistake to equate the two. It has a place, it has a role, but it's very, very specific around private cloud and infrastructure in the private cloud.
But people often think about virtualization as this stepping stone, don't they? You virtualize your data center and then...
The reason why virtualization to us has become so important as an end user is because we're separating the application from the hardware, which is where the industry has been for many years in the past. You remove that layer or that glue or integration really, you now can float it anywhere you want.
In terms of what Kevin said around virtualization, I think it is true, but only to a certain extent. Depends how you define, again, definitions are so important in this stuff. Yeah. Virtualization, is we're talking about it as server virtualization. In the application space, take a technology like Java, which VMware's been investing in for some time now. Java virtual machines, it's around application portability as well. And then up in a software as a service, Salesforce.com, for example, they're providing a multi-tenanted solution, which you could argue as well is just another form of abstraction or virtualization.
Simon Sherwood, technology journalist, you've heard all these buzzwords over the years. Is there a way of sort of tying together what you think are the core drivers that we've been speaking about?
Look, I think something that really needs to be considered is that whenever anything comes up that offers you radical simplification and big cost savings, that's what people go for first. Yeah. And virtualization let people get the low-hanging fruit of server consolidation done really quickly and effectively. So you went from having a lot of x86s doing nothing to have a lot of x86s that were all doing something, that were very busy and that could be made to look very busy, and you bought less stuff and your CFO smiled. Now people are looking at the public cloud and they're seeing that you can buy an insane amount of storage for a tiny, tiny cost. But what happens after people get the low-hanging fruit done is people go and look for where the business value lies. And I think that why we get some confusion around what cloud is and what it means and what its significance is that just about everybody did server consolidation and it worked real fast. Now, where's the value? That's right. And what are we going to call the stuff that gets you the value?
The debate's getting to the tipping point that's quite interesting around the business dimension of what we're going to do in the cloud. And I think what we were reaching towards there was the access to new applications, cheaper applications and things that you can bring into the business and mix up. But I think the challenge for the enterprise is how agile is your governance to actually embrace that and take advantage of it within your business.
The view that you shouldn't guarantee against a loss is very well founded as well. The very best and brightest of government and defence are no match to a very concerted state-based hacking group or an organised crime group. And of course, as soon as you bring resources together in one place, you massively increase the value of the target. So the real critical piece, as far as we're concerned, is not necessarily the SLA about saying that you will not suffer some kind of loss. It's about delivering an SLA which says that you will, in a timely manner, identify that something's happening and advise and alert to mitigate the loss that may take place.
You know, one day there may be a mistake and you have to go back through the emails. How are you going to go back through the emails to make sure that somebody actually did something correctly? How are you going to deal with potentially litigation or regulatory requests and so on? And this is I never hear this actually discussed as far as cloud.
Yeah, but how much of that's just an email archiving problem versus
Well,
cloud?
no, I was just giving a particular example. I mean, it can be any form of data. It's not really dealt with. I mean, you've got your data center today. You put some systems out into the cloud. They get backed up maybe by the vendor. You could back them up yourself, or you could back them up by the vendor. They're backed up by the vendor. You go to a different vendor. How do you know it's going to get backed up the same? How are you going to restore it? How are you going to get your data back?
So we've got Mark Vincent from Trim & Hoyle who's joining us. Thanks for joining us. What's the legal eagle's view of this? What sort of privacy issues?
I heard mention that there's not much talk about problems of data retention, backup, and other problems around sort of an email example. I hear only of problems and concerns about security, backup, data retention. What happens if my data's in Singapore or Hong Kong or India? It's right that companies think, well, what are the regulatory implications of taking data and putting it in another country?
Yeah.
Well, that other country can pass laws that relate to the data. Also, this country has laws about what you send out. So there's tens of pieces of legislation that have document retention requirements.
Has anybody actually in the real world had that as an issue in your business? Open to anyone. Up the back, yeah? So the guys from Virtual Office, Craig?
We were running a large HR company, set up offices in Chicago, running perfectly, and then the Patriot Act came along.
And so what happened? That was the end? Game over?
Bye-bye, Mr. Customer.
Wow.
We could not there was nothing we could do. We read the Patriot Act to try and find out if there was, a loophole in the clause.
Yeah, Kevin, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, the US Patriot Act is an interesting one. One client I spoke to said actually their understanding was it's not the data's hosted in America, it's the data is hosted by an American company. Yeah. So CSC, for example, could the American government turn around to CSC in Australia and say, you've got the data, you give it to me? So is it really a question of where it's stored or the company that has stewardship?
I mean, they're now talking about cloud brokers
that
will be providing these cloud services and helping people choose them.
And also cloud brokers who do certification or, a testing layer too, right?
Or results of use.
Okay, so maybe we're in the wrong business.
From the legal and due diligence perspective, the cloud brokering is something that I've been looking at and it's got real promise. There's things like the Common Assurance Maturity Model in Europe and other regional models where people are living up to certain standards, identifiable common standards, and there's common reporting about how different solutions map out on those standards. Really good for SMEs that don't want to invest $100,000 in due diligence. They just need an objective way of saying, well, this ticks all those boxes, I can buy it.
It's important to make sure that the provider is actually certified to the right level. And a lot of organisations are certifying cloud-based computing to that end, so that you've got something to rely on from a customer point of view.
Laws always lag, we know that. But, how many of these same arguments did we hear when the internet started? You'll never attach the corporate computers to the internet. I mean, why would you ever want to do that? And eventually it's the business demand, the service level, etc., that drives everybody to that model.
Fascinated by the idea of the tipping point. And John Duckett, Phillips Fox, is there a unique value proposition that you've seen as you've sort of looked at it, I guess from a privacy perspective, but also as customers think about, how do they think about their data and where it lives? What actually tips them into I have to do this now?
Tipping point. I think I use the analogy of moving buildings. When you move a building, you take that opportunity to do things differently. You seize that moment. And I think for a lot of mature organisations like us, not necessarily big, we're mature, our technology is mature, we've done all the things pretty much we want. And I mentioned earlier, commercially we don't see value in the cloud. In fact, generally it's the opposite. But if we were moving again, as a tipping point, we would totally reconsider a data centre and we would probably use that opportunity to outsource. And I think a lot of organisations find points in their evolvement where there'll be a point where they can evaluate what they've done and say this may be the moment to move a selective service or something more substantial such as a data centre out into say a hybrid cloud or something.
Okay. Richard Smith at Melbourne IT, what are your thoughts on that? Where does the tipping point come?
I think the tipping point's already starting to happen. So people are moving applications into virtual or cloud environments already now. I think the tipping point for organisations moving completely to the cloud, I'm not sure if that will ever happen. I think there will be a blend of services that will arrive where there'll be a hybrid model. Certain workloads are suited into internal data centres, others are better suited putting out to the cloud.
54% of businesses under 1,000 users, end users, are already using the cloud, and of that, the average is using 4 paid services. So that's already happening. That's the first point. The second point is that Amazon 2 weeks ago announced virtual machines for free. Free.
The cost model that I've heard earlier, it's great from what I've heard. It's a fixed cost per user per month. That's fantastic from a CIO, CFO especially, to know it's X dollars. It's great. I don't have to worry in 6 months' time, oh, I've got to pay some more consulting to upgrade. So it makes sense to me.
I think that's a really good point. I'd like to actually get a bit more on this. Clive Gold, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I don't understand if the conversion is a one-to-one. You know, that becomes an accounting thing, it becomes a finance thing. And I don't think that's what's underlying what we're talking about here. We're talking about moving, yes, certainly into a consumption model, but where the price is substantially different. So I wonder whether anybody wants to comment on that, that if you're just converting a capital expenditure to a stream, is that really what people are looking for? Because the bank can do that for you. Or are you looking to an infrastructure that provides a better service at a lower cost?
Just so in terms of another aspect of the cost that I think the service providers bring with this cloud movement that is really valuable to everyone is the idea of cost visibility. Being able to demonstrate the costs either from having a rate card that explains the costs in advance and lets business choose based on quality of service and service levels, or just after the fact in terms of just usage of the private cloud technology.
Michael Warrilow, in a previous life you were of course an analyst. Now you're at VMware, which I like to happily think of as the Switzerland of IT.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, what are your thoughts on how we understand the pain points or the real drivers here?
Well, look, as an analyst, I used to talk that we fluctuated between the driver from the organisations for time to value to increase the speed of delivery of solutions, and then when things get rough, it's about cost, and we alternate between these two, and quality suffers somewhere in between. But what we're talking about in general here is complexity and a drive or a journey towards simplicity.
Okay, so the simplicity message still rings out. And is cost second to that then?
Well, that varies during the economic cycle. You know, over the last couple of years, cost has been king, but we're starting to swing a little bit back towards time to value. We're always trying to do this in increasingly shorter business cycles. So technology has got to keep up or get ahead of that.
David Kaplan, you're also joining us from Earthwave. What are your thoughts on that sort of consulting, pay-as-you-go model? That's definitely playing into what you guys do as a business, but how do you build a practical strategy that lets people move into this in a way that doesn't hurt?
IT, as someone mentioned before, has always been a cost. Now it's an essential cost. It's the crack of business. When you concentrate everything into a cloud, you've got the opportunity to have experts looking after your email. It's a great example.
Presumably they'll do security better than you do.
That's right. So I really see cloud as an opportunity, especially for the vendor community, to actually get security right, because right at the moment security's a big problem.
Let's talk about another fun issue, one of my favourites, which is licensing. Everyone's smiling already. There's a question here from an online guest. Mark, when will we see licensing and pricing arrangements that are more than another form of a lease? That's a great question. Who wants to jump on that one?
But Oracle is now going to support running Oracle RAC on VMware. And that's a day I don't think a lot of people thought would happen in our lifetime. So we're already seeing some of the stalwarts starting to move the way that they do these things.
Changing the license model wholesale is not going to happen anytime soon. But I think a lot of the add-on applications are already being charged as a service.
Right. When I talk to a lot of CIOs, that's one of their biggest beefs. It's like these vendors just don't get their act together in a hurry. I would now like to go from being locked into these things to some sense of flexibility. How do you see the tension there? Because clearly, again, this gets back to you're a listed company, in Germany. You've got sales cycles. How do you talk about shifting an entire sort of structure, a financial structure for a business to a new way of doing things?
Weaning the sales divisions off the drugs.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it.
So it's a combination of balancing the revenues and moving gradually over time. We clearly understand that our business has to go from less reliance on the sale per quarter to the annuity revenue stream, whether that's locked in or not.
We have quite a few people who want to say something. Just quickly at the back of TriPoint.
I was going to say that the implications for that, from an auditor's perspective, is somewhat vexed. Let's just say that's a big shift.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about the capabilities of offering the platforms and the legal aspects of it, but the actual auditability and how you can recognise revenue and when you can recognise revenue. That so the concept of a transition, I think, from a vendor's perspective, integrators, far safer, and your auditors are going to feel better about it, and so will the customers' auditors.
This transition of vendors moving towards the new models is also a journey.
Yeah.
So it's going to happen in stages.
Peter Prowse, we've introduced you from Dimension Data. What's the way that you approach this? Because clearly your business model changes in the middle of this too. And I probably should also ask you, do you think you're better at looking after customers than our friends at EMC?
Well, it's coming up to Q4 for EMC, so they're, I won't probably, I'll take the fifth on that one. What we're seeing is customers are looking to the integrators to be able to walk them through the morass of the various vendors' offerings. So
this is actually a very good thing for the channel and integration community, isn't it?
I think it's absolutely the time and place to be in an integrator, and I actually moved from a vendor to an integrator deliberately because of this shift.
Siobhan, a quick comment?
There just seems to be a very polarisation here in terms of service providers and vendors, because the reality is the vendors are becoming service providers, as shown by HP buying EDS, in terms of IBM Global Services, in terms of EMC moving into services. So the vendors are becoming service providers and integrators. They've noticed what's happening. So that line is really getting blurred.
Okay, well there's lots of hands going up now. Up the back.
And same thing, the integrators are now becoming service providers.
Right.
So that whole shift is actually going from the vendors all the way down to
right, and
service providers.
So that's quite fascinating, because what it means is that your competitor tomorrow may not exist today, right? You know, it could be completely changed.
And our competitor yesterday may not exist tomorrow.
Right.
So,
Well,
and I think the vendors, the biggest fear for a vendor is being disintermediated from a customer, and how do they control that disintermediation? The biggest opportunity for an integrator is, being able to provide a range of solutions where we control the customer rather than the vendor controls the customer. So, speaking bluntly, we think it's a great opportunity.
Well, you've been looking for a right of reply, haven't you?
I have. EMC and Cisco and VMware, we're technology companies, and let's not confuse this. I mean, you can take a pig, you can put lipstick on it, but it's still a pig. So the technologies and the innovation that's required to make these things happen is enormous, and that's where you're getting consortia coming up, like the VCE consortia, and that's why it's fun to be a technologist in a vendor. But we are not a services company. The services we provide are to help people use our technologies. I don't think Cisco or VMware has any services to compete against our service providers, and the critical part of the way we go to market through the Dimension Data.
So it's quite interesting. Does it mean then that your customers of tomorrow, skip ahead 5 years or something like that, are you going to be selling more to, for example, public cloud providers, the telcos even? I mean, these guys are sowing truckloads of money into data centers.
That's a distinct possibility.
Absolutely. I mean, as I said, there are real technology challenges for Telstra Melbourne IT to scale up. Those are the problems that we're trying to solve. We are not trying to compete with Melbourne IT or Telstra or Dimension Data. We need them to turn our technology into a service that customers can consume.
Simon, how do you see this competitive landscape?
I actually don't care. Look, there are people who get to run storage and servers and data centres for a living. But what we really want is businesses to operate better.
There's a sense of the IT department wanting to control this whole conversation versus a business that wants some results. That seems to be like a big roadblock to how do we make this kind of whole thing work. So yes, Andrew?
Just an observation that when we are selling software as a service, it is almost never to the IT department. In the IT department are wholesale a blockage.
Right, so this is a CEO, CFO
So the businesses, they want a business outcome, they'll bypass the IT department. So the whole concept for a private cloud is an internal debate. And
what, for CIOs or for who?
It's nice for the people in this room, for the industry, for CIOs, have the debate with yourselves. The business is out there getting ahead of you.
Yeah.
And that's what Kevin's referring to. We've got to change, and we've got to work out how that we get outside of our normal buying centres and enable CIOs to be more relevant to the business as opposed to just a provider of the electricity supply.
I'd like to get a sense of how do we measure success? What does success look like? Is it a financial success? Is it a technical success? Michael Warrilow, I think you've probably got an insight into this, probably from your days as an analyst. What are your thoughts?
For the private cloud, it's kind of around how they're moving to shared service, how they're facilitating some of the use cases they couldn't get to before around a federated backbone and the ability to have a much faster provisioning of service.
Well, Brett Harris, you're also from EMC, in a client-facing role presumably. Absolutely. So what are they saying to you? What would success look like for your customers?
I think Marco is a good example. I mean, you know, for IMED, from what I understand, that looking at the cloud, but not at the moment, it's not necessarily going to provide the most cost-effective option, but it's going to provide a better service to their clients, as you mentioned, about you know, giving them access to information that currently is held in-house. So I think it's all about service.
It's moving from a sort of a seller's market to a buyer's market in effect, and customers have increasingly more power to be able to decide on the solution that they want for their environment, and whether they want to buy it on a capital acquisition model or they want to buy it on a consumption model.
Yeah, the answer to the question about how do you tell whether it's been a success, we've got a couple of lines of questions that we sit down and ask clients, and we say, look, have you got the things that were promised? Have you got a cheaper outcome? Have you got you know, scalability, etc., etc.? And you know, we can gauge, you know, quantitatively whether that's occurred. But I think by far and away the best example of success is, have we freed up your thoughts to focus on your business and how your applications can improve your business?
Okay.
Have we taken away that massive attention that you'd invested in just plain old infrastructure and getting the servers to work?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you know, 80% of what our IT departments did was about just keeping the things spinning, adding almost zero value to the business.
Adoption is the success metric, and the final step before adoption is risk removal. If you look at any sales cycle,
So how much risk will you put up with?
I'm sorry?
How much risk will you put up with?
Exactly right. And so I think it was IDC, the recent report said that 87 point something statistics, but the inhibitor to adoption of the cloud was about removal of risk. And so to get the user community over the hump of risk is really the key to the adoption of this. And so I don't think we're yet doing enough to remove the risk in the minds of the business people.
Well, Kevin Block, I'm sure you've got something to say about success. You've seen this from, well, you know, Cisco, they don't, you want everyone to succeed, right? You're sort of playing happy campers like VMware.
So, yeah, I mean, there's a couple of points. I'll deal with the first point from an end user perspective. What most CEOs and businesses are looking for is, you know, things like, can they get their people to be more productive? I mean, besides being more profitable, okay, but just below that. You know, more productive. They're looking at innovation. What's their next business? They're looking at things like sustainability, which we haven't discussed. You know, greenhouse gases and carbon emissions, etc. Those are really big issues, and I think cloud is enabling them to think about that. Where, you know, in terms of where it's exciting to be right now, system integrator versus a vendor. I think Peter's right. If a vendor is sticking to where the market was, absolutely, they're going to go out of business. But the exciting thing is, as customers want to move towards cloud, there are some real technical challenges. Just going from one cloud to another, making these workspaces flow between them, there's real technical obstacles. So it's actually a very exciting place to be from a vendor point of view, because these are the challenges that are going to really show the leaders in the industry in the next few years.
We've been talking about all the different types of clouds, but I'm wondering if we assume that some sort of cloud is going to be the dominant form of computing, and I just want to know, quite simply, how many years away? So, you know, can we do like an old school show of hands perhaps? Let's try 1 year. Okay, 3 years. Yeah, okay. And 5 years. Okay, so kind of evenly split between 3 and 5 years. Well, I think that's a great way to wrap it all up. On that note, that is all the time that we have for today. So thanks to our panel of cloud experts for joining us in the studio today, and for those of you who joined us via webcast, and thank you for watching The Circle Live. This is an EMC technology community that tackles the tough questions. I'm Mark Jones. See you next time.